Welcome back to your A&P lab. How'd it go with the epithelial tissues? Remember, I'm here if you need help recognizing the tissues. This week, we're going to continue developing our eye for tissues. The most common tissue in the human body is connective tissue. It binds our organs together and holds them in place. It supports the body and gives it its frame so we aren't a puddle of tissues oozing along the floor. It helps to transport nutrients from one location to another, and it also stores energy for us, among other functions. In the lecture, we went over quite a few functions, and you'll want to be sure that you remember those for your exam. You'll have to recall them from memory and write them out as a list. For lab, though, our goal is to recognize and name connective tissues correctly when we see them. In this video, we're going to focus on the characteristics of these tissues so that when your lab practical comes around, you should be able to distinguish connective tissues from all of the other tissue types. Your sole objective for this video is to distinguish connective tissue from other tissue types when you see them. These are examples of connective tissues. Remember from our study of epithelial tissues, when you see a darkly stained area like these, you're typically looking at nuclei. And these are red blood cells. They're mature, so they don't have nuclei, but each one of these spheres is a red blood cell. What do you notice? You probably notice that the cells in all three of these tissues are quite far apart in comparison to the epithelial tissues that we looked at last week. One of the things that's going to help you recognize connective tissues in comparison to all other tissues is that the cells are quite distant from each other, and there's going to be lots of extracellular matrix surrounding the cells. So all of this area that you see here that's not occupied by the cells, all of that is ECM. Now, on the off chance that you don't remember what epithelial tissues look like, first, tisk, 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 please go back and look at those. But on the left side of the slide, I've actually put epithelial tissue for you. So you'll recognize this as stratified squamous epithelial tissue right here. Notice how close the nuclei for these cells are to each other compared to this side, which is another connective tissue. All the little dark blue points that you see, these are the nuclei of cells. So you can see there's still more distance between the cells on the right picture versus the left picture. So again, that's a major difference between epithelial tissues and connective tissues. Once you've established that a tissue is likely a connective tissue, the next thing you want to look for is the protein fibers. Remember that the extracellular matrix is composed of two parts. You have the ground substance, which includes things like your interstitial fluid, nutrients, and waste from cells. It also has these GAGs, these glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, and other molecules. But then the second part of the ECM is the protein fibers. And there are three primary protein fibers that we're going to look for. The first one is collagen. So in this image, the collagen is represented by these thick purple caterpillar looking rods. Remember, collagen's main function is to strengthen a tissue, to help it resist pulling forces and compressive forces. So you'll recognize this protein when you see it because it looks really kind of like yarn. So it'll be a thick fiber on the microscope slide or microscope image in the ECM of a connective tissue. Second type of protein fiber that we'll see sometimes is the elastic fiber. And elastic fibers tend to look like threads. Often they're stained dark purple or black. but they'll look kind of like little thin squiggly threads on the microscope image. Third type of fiber is the reticular fiber. Looks kind of like this. It's a collagen fiber, but it's not as thick as the other collagen fibers. Reticular fibers are kind of medium sized. They tend to be branched, okay, and they're not as common as the collagen and the elastic fibers. My hope is that by the time I finish this video and the next video, you will have learned how to recognize these protein fibers. So these are three connective tissues. Let's take a look at the protein fibers as they'll appear on a slide. So here you see this kind of thick band of lightly stained material. This is a collagen fiber. These kind of thick, I don't know what you would call them, swirly, for lack of a better term, swirly bands of material. These are also collagen fibers. So remember I told you that collagen fibers are kind of thick. Here's a couple of examples of it. In the middle picture, we're looking at bands of collagen fibers. So this might be one, but it's kind of bundled together to make a band. Over here, we're looking at individual collagen fibers. They'll be the kind of thick strands that run through the microscope image. Next, let's look for some elastic fibers. So elastic fibers, remember I told you they look kind of like squiggly threads? Here's one. Here are some others. They just don't have that squiggly appearance, but we will see later on that they can do this kind of squiggly thing that hints at their function of stretching and then recoiling in a tissue. So that's the elastic fiber. It's going to look kind of darkly stained anytime we see it. Finally, we have reticular fibers, and you have a few reticular fibers. They're the kind of thin, lightly stained fibers in the background of this tissue. But you might be able to see them better over here. So these kind of dark threads running through the slide, these are reticular fibers. So again, they're a type of collagen fiber, but they're not as thick as the collagen that we saw in the previous two slides. Okay, so again, the primary thing we're looking for that's going to help distinguish a connective tissue from some other type of tissue is the distance between the cells and the amount of ECM that we see in an image. We'll also look for the presence of protein fibers. So here are 8 images of tissues from the human body. I'd like for you to take out a piece of paper, number 1 to 8, and then tell me which one of these are connective tissues. You can put a yes beside the number that corresponds to a connective tissue. Put this video on pause, then come back and we'll look at the images together and see if you're correct. So here are the answers. Were you right? Remember, the key to a connective tissue is the distance between the cells, lots of ECM, and protein fibers. So if we look at slide number 1, the kind of dark purple, maybe magenta material that you see here, these are the cells. You can kind of see the nuclei, and they're kind of spread out, especially when you compare them to the tissue here in panel number 5, where the nuclei are basically right on top of each other. So that's our first clue that number 1 is a connective tissue. Second clue is we see these protein fibers here. They look kind of like swirls again. Okay, I think it looks like seaweed in the ocean, but when you see something like this, you should think protein fibers. Third thing is there's again lots of ECM around. So this is a connective tissue. Number 2 is also a connective tissue. The ECM is the material that is kind of this grayish color surrounding the red blood cells. So this is a red blood cell and the white blood cell, and it's surrounding platelets as well. That's the little purple specks that you see here. So this is a connective tissue. Number 3 is also a connective tissue. This is cartilage. Again, we can see that the cells are really quite far apart. There's lots of ECM separating them. Now this is hyaline cartilage, and there are collagen fibers running all throughout this tissue. You just can't see them. So do be aware that sometimes you may not see the protein fibers very easily, but you just have to remember that they're there. The biggest clue is going to be the distance between the cells and the ECM that surrounds them. The last one was number 7. So all of these kind of pink masses that you see going in all different directions, these are all bundles of collagen fiber. That's all ECM. The dark material that you see here and here and here and here, all of these are cells, and you can again see they're kind of far apart. Also notice none of them are cuboidal, columnar, or squamous, at least not exactly. So that's another hint that this is a connective tissue and not an epithelial tissue. All of the other images here are epithelial tissues. So you can see how the plasma membrane of adjacent cells is really right on top of each other, which we don't see with the connective tissues. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at each connective tissue individually, try to come up with some ways of recognizing them so that you can identify these tissues when you see them on your quiz this week and on your lab practical in a couple of weeks. I'll see you at the next video. So in this video, we tried to distinguish epithelial tissues from other tissues by sight. We talked about 4 characteristics to help you with that, and we got a little practice looking at tissues. You will have to do this on your lab quiz, so if you don't have this skill yet, it's something that you'll want to develop before you get to that quiz. If you have any questions about identifying epithelial tissues, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm here to help you to be able to see these things. Don't be frustrated if you don't see it yet. Identifying tissues and looking at histological slides is a skill that you have to develop. It comes in time.